Good afternoon, collectors and friends. Welcome to another episode of Trading Card Therapy. This is episode number 115. We're going to kick off a series of 10 guests. If you remember last year on Trading Card Therapy, we did a series of 25 guests, meaning we did 25 episodes in a row. And it was a lot of fun. It was also a lot of work. And I want to have a big shout out and thank you to each and every one of those guests who took that journey with me. And so we've decided to kind of take that journey in early 2026. And I'm excited because we have an amazing guest lined up for today. So stay tuned in just a minute for Brian and what we'll be talking about today. But if you are interested in vintage baseball cards, in particular, 1948 Leaf Baseball, this is a show you do not want to miss. So before we bring on Brian, I just have a couple of brief announcements. First and foremost, and most importantly, I really appreciate each and every one of you that either made a comment on our last YouTube episode of Trading Card Therapy or reached out directly to me, whether it be email, text, phone, IG messages, and all that kind of good stuff. But I really did feel the love and the support for my son going down the chop, and I just wanted to report back that everything went really well. And Crosby is on his road to growing up. So I appreciate all the well wishes. Thank you. Next up is we just got this amazing card back from PSA. And if you remember, I'll turn it over like this. Recently, we were able to buy fresh from the wild, right? An ungraded example of the iconic, might be the most iconic card from the 1990s. And that is the Ken Griffey Jr. Mickey Mantle dual autograph card, which, believe it or not, was inserted into packs in 1994. And as a young lad, I was never able to pull one of these. I did have one many years ago, but sold it. And we recently had the good fortune of coming across one of these. We just got it back from PSA. And as you can see, the card itself, which is not easy to grade, many of them come back authentic. This graded a 7, but the more important autograph, I guess it's a combination grade, I'm not sure, but the Mantle and Griffey came back a 9. Not sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm certainly going to enjoy it for now. And then since we're going to be talking about 1948 Leaf, I thought Brian would appreciate this. Well, we just bought, it's not a lot, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so call it 20 cards. We just bought a small collection of 1948 Leaf Baseball. There's no, super short prints, no satchel, no Jackie, but man, looking at that blazing red of Teddy Ballgame never gets old. This one in particular is well-centered, so I really dig that. And if you see, as we run through this collection, the Teddy might just be the nicest condition card in it because the Wagner here is just trounced. We got a Luke Appling, Marty Marien's his rookie. We're not going to go through every card. Blackwell's a decent name, Vandermeer. And then we'll stop on these two. I believe they have variations in the set. And so with that, before we bring on Brian, I briefly wanted to share with you the story behind this collection because Dan, one of our acquisitions associates, was able to get. Now, it's not necessarily the most exciting, but it just goes to show you never know where these cards are going to come from. So one by the name of Ellen reached out to us back in October, asking for information about this small collection of 48 Leafs. They belonged to her father-in-law. She wanted to know what they might be worth based on condition and the players that were in it. She spoke with Dan, who's our acquisition associate. We gave her a free appraisal once we got the images. Dan made her an offer, and she was ready to ship the cards to us to finalize the condition and then get a check sent out for the collection. But right before she closed the lid on the box, her husband changed his mind and told her that we should shop it around and get a second opinion. I mean, who could argue with that? So she never updated Dan, and we were kind of kept in the dark. Dan reached out a few times with no answer. Finally, last week, Dan reached out. One of the things we're doing here is kind of cleaning up our old leads from last year and years past. And if you're not familiar with the term or the terminology that the fortune is in the follow-up, it really applies to any industry, any business. And so we gave this collection just one more chance. And lo and behold, Dan reached out. We found out that, unfortunately, the father-in-law was moving into assisted living, senior living community, back in October. And the reason why he gave them the cards is because he didn't want them anymore. Or husband wanted to make sure they were getting a fair offer on the father's childhood memories. After speaking with several local and out-of-state dealers, we made the best offer on the table. So kudos to the team here at Just Collect. I'm proud of you guys. Because of the holidays, they took a break from the collection. Well, Dan reached out one last time and it reminded them to finish this up and decided to ship the collection to our office. We gave them a FedEx label so they didn't have to worry about the shipping and the insurance costs. And once it arrived just the other day, easy peasy, we finalized the condition, everything went out. And she said that the check for the collection, they're going to use the money to help the father-in-law with anything he might need to make his new residence and living situation better. And so with that, we appreciate you letting me share the story. So I'm now going to bring on Brian. Brian, can you hear me okay?
Hear you great.
Excellent. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So for those that don't know you, Brian, I'm going to show it on screen. You have written what I believe is not only a really fun read, but might prove to be a very important historical book in the world of vintage baseball cards.
It's turning out to be that way. What started as a fun little project all of a sudden turned into getting on a bunch of different channels like this, but then also getting on Sports Illustrated and stuff like that for kind of debunking the nomenclature of Jackie Robinson's rookie card being in a 48 leaf when I basically found that it was 49 leaf.
All right, well, let's not jump the shark quite yet. We got to make people, tune in at least for more than 4 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it is. But thanks for laughing, Bri. So before we get into it, if you could, please introduce yourself to the community and to the audience, and not just from the standpoint of, hey, I've written this book, but maybe, hey, at 9 years old, I love baseball, and this is kind of, how I ended up here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes, and got my first pack of cards in 1986. So that kind of started me down the trail of loving baseball cards. Grew up a Yankee fan, the whole 9 yards. Had everything from my Reggie Barr all the way through to the Dave Winfield love until he moved on from the Yanks. But what started in '86 continued on through the late '80s, early '90s. Right around '92, I actually started working at a baseball card shop in the little town that I grew up in, which was great because it was the first time that I actually got to see not just the cards that were in my collection, but the cards that were kind of coming in. And I found myself, as we kind of went through, as many people did in the 90s, it's like, junk wax era it's true. It was just that. And so, I got to a point where, growing up that, we were buying packs like crazy and they were just stacking up on shelves. And I was like, there's got to be something else. And on one afternoon that I was working the shop, a guy walked in and wanted to trade 2 1914 Cracker Jack cards for a pack of, I think, like Stadium Club or something like that.
Oh my God, I'm ill.
Yeah, so I bought the Cracker Jacks and gave them and paid for the pack.
Smart man.
I was like, good to go. And that started the whole vintage love. And it was, I think, probably maybe a month or two later, there was an auction one town over from where I grew up. And it was all vintage. Like, it was all pre-war. And I unfortunately don't have the eyes that I have today. Back then, all I saw was a ton of tobacco because I bought, I think it was like 26 tobacco cards that were all Hall of Famers. And I didn't know it because I didn't know the names. And then there was a 33 Gowdy Ruth that I had the money in my pocket. My dad's like, I'll front you the cash to get it. And I'm like, nah, it's all right. I don't need it. So passed on that one. But that really kind of started me down the path of vintage first and kind of liquidating a lot of the modern stuff that I had that had any value, which was not very much, and really focusing more on just kind of that 1940s and back, because I think that there was I'm a designer. So, growing up in that kind of artistic fling and everything like that, there was a kind of a romantic love with just the lore, the folklore of the old players and the stories, and not just, dead ball era and stuff like that. It was all the way through the Negro Leagues and just the history of baseball, that the trinkets of cards kind of brought it and made it real, that allowed for those kind of deep dives, almost like reading a comic book and getting a backstory type thing. That's like, why do they call him Home Run Baker, and why, and these things, and just kind of being able to see players at different points in their career, and how not just everything that was going on in society, but also just everything that was going on in the game was captured in the cards. And that's kind of what led me to the Leaf cards, was that I thought that it was a fascinating crossroads of the history of baseball. And so it kind of became an obsession of sorts at the start, just because it was like, okay, wow, you have Honus Wagner, John, as the card you just showed, but then you also have the Babe, as a memorial card because he died in 48. And then you've got Joe D, you've got Teddy Ballgame, and then you've got Stan Musial. And then you've got like this new era because you've got Satchel Paige, Larry Doby, and Jackie Robinson. So it just became this, as a lover of the history of the game, it almost became like the set that represented it all in one neat little package. But I didn't fully grasp the adventure that I was jumping into with like being, I'm going to make a set that's going to be a heirloom piece that I'll pass down to my kids. So,
I first want to say I appreciate you sharing that with us, because it makes it that much more fun to know how you arrived at starting this passion project. As you said, you certainly had no idea what you were going to find, right? That's part of the fun that comes out of the research. But one of the things you mentioned that I was curious if the audience who's listening to this, whether it be on Apple or Spotify or watching on YouTube, might concur, that for me as a young boy, right, early teens, when I started to see just a couple of those cards at like the Steinbach Mall show, which was the big show around me, or the Howell Flea Market show, whenever I would see one of those cards from yesteryear, it made those people and those players real for me.
Yep.
Because even though I had heard of Ty Cobb and I had heard of Jackie Robinson, I think there was something to seeing the physical card being like, wow, they're not just like a legend. It's not just a myth. Like, I think that they played. And of course, I'm giving myself goosebumps, which is absurd because obviously I know that they're real. But I do remember that feeling of like, OMG, like what's going on? And of course, similar to you, I probably had enough money that I pissed away, frankly, on either 89 Upper Deck or 91 Donruss trying to get an elite. And like I probably stepped over a Ty Cobb tobacco for $80.
Right.
Because that's what a low grade one cost back then.
Yeah.
I'm like, $80, Brian. That's absurd. You know how many cards I could own for $80?
Well, one of my best friends worked at the card shop too. And during the COVID years when the prices were just sailing, I reached out to him and I go, how the hell did we not end up with a Jordan rookie? Like, I mean, literally in the throes of us growing up, him a huge basketball player. I'm like, how did we not get one of those? Like how did that not end up in one of our collections?
I think that same way about a 33 Gowdy Ruth.
Yeah.
Because like, even though I remember seeing the Cobbs and some other tobacco, like, think about it, right? 33 Gowdy Ruths when I was growing up was still a good 20 years later, meaning produced. So they were a lot more common than tobacco cards.
Yep.
And I don't remember the numbers. Maybe it was $800 or $400. But I remember thinking like, oh my God, is that really Babe Ruth?
Yeah.
And then of course I'm like, oh, well, even though I might have enough money this summer at the end, I'd rather have 983 different cards. Why not?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the math worked in a certain convoluted kind of way, and what was funny about the 33 Gowdy is that it was one of those ones, as all collectors have, the one that you let get away, that just haunts you. You wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat and you're just like, how could I have let that go? When I moved to Oregon, I grew up, my folks both were in antiques, and I basically grew up at auctions. And so when I moved out to Oregon, I found the local estate auction place and just kind of kept an eye on it. And sure enough, it just popped up out of nowhere, was a 33 Ruth in the middle of this estate sale. And so I was just like, oh, I got to go see this. I mean, there's no way this is real. It's a Fritz reprint. There's no way. And so we got there, and my wife knew the story, and she's like, go for it. You've got a chance to make this right in the world, so go for it. And so I get there, and the guy pulls it out of the case, and I look at it, and I'm like, oh, damn, it's real. It smells real, looks real, the whole nine. I'm like, all right, well, let's cross this off the list. I don't know what this is going to cost me, but let's do it. Guy opens up at $500, no bids. And I'm sitting back, waiting, no problem. Okay, $350. I bid. I'm like, what the hell? Let's go for it. Nobody bids. Somebody goes in at $360. I go $375 and got it. Graded a 1. But it's in the collection, so I was like, hey, can't complain with that. So
check it off the list. And by the way, for those that don't know, pretty much any of the 4 Ruths from the 1933 Gowdy set in a grade of 1 right now is probably selling for no less than $5,000, depending on eye appeal. So, Bri, you did okay.
I did all right. Yeah. And we'll call it a win.
yeah, moving on from that big win and the 33 Gaudy set, tell me about the first time you either owned or laid eyes on a 48 Leaf card, and when did you start to kind of prioritize that set in your mind of not just the book yet, but more of like, wow, this is really important to me?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was talking with a bunch of guys about this recently. In 2008, as a financial venture, we'll call it, my father-in-law and I put together a 1914 and 1915 Cracker Jack set. That was the first time that I had actually gone through and committed to putting together a set that wasn't like 1988 tops. That was just out of sheer numbers that I'm like, oh, I've got 7 sets. Great. We've got kindling. So it's yeah. So in 2008, we go through and through the hobby resources and connections. Basically, I was the guy facilitating the deals, and he was the money man. And unfortunately, 2008 was not what you would call a great financial year for spending outside of investments and stuff like that. So he took a loss on the cards when they went to sale at Robert Edwards, unfortunately. But we had 2 sets that were immaculate. I mean, they were fantastic. And I think the Cobb in the 14 set was a 4 or a 5. And the 15, I think, was a 4. So, I mean, we had heavy hitting cards. And they were good cards. And they came by way of just kind of smart purchases. Like, I think we bought a master set at one point and got the entirety of it, but got the number 93, the Del Pratt in the 14 set, which is, at the time was the toughest to find. But after going through that whole thing, even with the sale and not having it kind of realize the cost, especially what it would be right now, I kind of had this bug for putting together sets where I was just like, I was never a set guy. I was always just a singles guy. And so I was like, well, it'd be kind of fun because the cards have the copyrights on the back of 48 and 49. 48's the year that my parents were born. 49's the year that my wife's parents were born. I'm like, that kind of lends itself to that. The artwork from the design side, just on the straight 4-color lithography were striking to me, where I was just like, this is great. I mean, it's just simple, but at the same time, it's super impactful. Like, it just kind of felt almost like a Warhol type thing. And so I was like, I just aesthetically love the cards. And so that started it. And to be honest, the first 49 cards, I don't know that I could have gotten them any faster. I mean, the Ted Williams that you showed, I was looking back because I kind of tried to keep fairly good records of what I was paying for cards, and I paid $112 on a best offer on eBay for my Ted Williams. Granted, centered, but has a pinhole. But, again,
I don't think you could buy even like a corner of it for $112 now.
I got a joke on that one too. So I'm an in the house kind of guy. I'm not a pristine, sharp corners, well centered, anything.
Sure.
I buy the cards that more relate to me. So off center, rounded corners, have seen some more action, stuff like that. It relates to me. And then I bought the Jackie off of a divorcee who was basically liquidating her ex-husband's estate. Essentially, she's just like, he left him here, I'm selling him. So I got that for not very much at all, and it graded a 4. So it all of a sudden became like the benchmark of the first 49. But then digging into it, and then I was introduced to the idea of short prints. And it was just like, it was a whole other thing because I had never come across any other sets that had not only a part that were printed at basically a proportion less than everything else, a ratio less than everything else, but were insanely difficult to find. And in talking with Dr. James Beckett years ago, he was saying that in the industry itself, nobody knew about the short print set until the 70s, until they started kind of popping up in the Great Lakes. So it became a challenge.
Let's pause there for a minute, because I think that's really important. So, because I had heard this before as well. Think about this. The set's issued in either 48 or 49 until we get into the book. We'll leave it at that for the moment.
We'll leave it at that. Teaser.
Yeah. So it takes just about a couple decades, which is insane, right? But there's no TV for at least a little bit of this period. There's certainly no internet. And effectively, it takes over 20 years for collectors, which, by the way, was still a new thing, for them to even understand and realize that there were other cards in this epic Leaf baseball card set. And I don't know if people were using the term short print, but they were most certainly harder to find, and people understood that. So can you maybe help the audience understand, as well as me, why were the cards starting to come out in the Great Lakes, Michigan area?
Yeah, so this is where we start getting into the research of the book and starting to understand leaf itself. And it's like there's almost like some baseline things that you have to understand about leaf to understand everything else that kind of follows, right? You know, Topps, Bowman, everything like that. They saw baseball cards as a way to not only push their gum, but it was a way to make more money, to engage with kids and everything like that. And that's what they did really well. Leaf was solely focused on candy. That's it. They were a candy company. In fact, Saul Leaf, the owner of the company, would later say through his son, through an interview that I found, that basically he liked the cards in general, just the cards, because they had 4 sets. They liked the cards because it would help protect the gum from breaking. He was worried about his gum. He didn't give a damn about the
amazing,
the
right?
He just wanted, it was cardboard backing. It's fantastic. Great. So their distribution is out of North Cicero in Chicago. That's where they're based. They did everything on site. They made the candy, they made the cards on site. So through the research of the book, I was able to find that they were basically printing the cards on the same stock that they made the candy boxes out of. So think about a swing shift, right? Think about guys that are working the swing shift. They basically retool the printing presses that they're putting out the candy boxes all day long on. And they're like, okay, we're going to take the sheet out, and now we're just going to print cards tonight. And so that's what they did. They would print them 4 basically sets of 49 per sheet, and they would run them through that way. And it was 4-color process: the yellow, the blue, the red, and then the black. And then on the back, they would have the details on there too. Being that it was a 1-color press, lots of errors. So that's why you get things like misaligned plates, you get upside down backs, you get blank backs, you get blank fronts. I mean, you get all kinds of stuff.
And so so Bri, for those that are not printing experts understand, I just want to interrupt you for 1 second. When you mean it's a 1-color press, can you explain? I think I know what that means, but can you explain a little more specifically what that means?
Yeah. So typically, if you're again, if we get into the lithography of T206s, of Bowmans or anything like that, they're running that on a printing press where basically there's what's called keys, which is almost like a gate that has a different color. And so as a sheet goes through, it goes through and each color is applied, keeping the registration perfect, so that, there's no offsets or anything like that. But it goes through and it receives all those colors in cadence as it goes through. This being a 1-color press, and the only way that I was able to figure this out is by their printing errors, by seeing where things went wrong. And you can tell it's a 1-color press because there are cards out there that it's like, okay, the time that they ran the black ink was right, the time that they ran the blue ink was right, the time that they ran the red ink was right, but the yellow was upside down. Okay, so obviously they're running 1 color at a time. And when you think
about it, which is the only way those kinds of errors could happen.
Right, because when you're pulling the sheet out, setting it to dry, and then pulling it back and then putting it back in, that's why you get shifts. That's why you get things that are not lining up, is because you're basically touching it every single time that you're putting on a different color. And then you have the oddball times that you're putting one in and you flip the sheet because the guy's like, whatever, it's lunchtime, send it through, and now you get everything transposed the wrong way, and you get a color block on a card that's not supposed to be there, but it's actually, it's so-and-so's background or anything like that. So that's why you get that. And so, one of the things that I found recently that again blew my mind was there's 2 cards on eBay right now that have the wrong backs on them. Positionally, they're correct. Directionally, they're wrong. And I'm like, I can't figure out how they did that, because on the sheet they would align a certain way, and you can't flip a sheet and have the back be upside down. So it's like it doesn't work out.
It almost seems physically impossible, but I understand what you mean, because you spend so much time on the project. Like, you have a really good idea of what was going on. And just as we're sitting here and talking, I don't want to steal your thunder, Bri, but the way that I understand it, because I have a buddy who collects 48 leaf football very heavily, but really talking about baseball and the football, these color variations were basically just happening by accident, effectively.
Yep.
And to think about them like literally holding the sheet on a singular sheet and then feeding it back in, it really does, both for full transparency, I have a jacking to 6, but for those, whether it be you have 1 card or you're working on a high grade leaf set, and the way that everything was made, it makes me think that there really is a premium, and it's rightfully so a premium for the high grade examples, because in my own mind, and I know it's because of what I saw in the 80s on the reruns of Laverne and Shirley, but I remember watching an episode of Laverne and Shirley on like the floor of this factory, and I've always thought about like that's how they made Topps cards.
Yeah.
This is how they made Leaf cards. Like no one cared. Someone might be smoking a cigarette in one hand or eating a PB&J in the other, right? Like inserting the sheet, and you're like, how is there a peanut butter color, on this? And it's because there was no quality control. Yeah. But speaking of which, and I wanted, because it seems like you'd be a great person to clarify. So is this how some of these funky color variations, for example, like on the Joe DiMaggio Leaf, is that how these came to be? Because if there's only 4 colors on the press, how can you have a different color, i.e. a 5th color that didn't even happen in the press? Can you explain that to us with your background?
Yeah, totally. So this was one of those, again, through the story of the book, I was able to not even reconnect. I was fortunate enough to have a great uncle who was still alive. He was 99 years old, lived on Long Island, and after the war, he was a flight engineer in the war, came back, and my great-grandfather actually owned a building, and there was a real estate company, and there was a print press in there. And so my great uncle worked on the print press, and this is circa 1948. And so at one point when my dad was down visiting him, because I was living out in Oregon at that time, I had him bring some of the cards down just to kind of show him, just to kind of get his opinion of it. And he was able to clarify more things than I think I would have been able to find and dig for, if I was still working on the book type thing. The color variations, and it's interesting because there's a lot of industry kind of thoughts that are kind of locked in, right? Where it's like, well, I see my Stan Musial and it's got a periwinkle back and this one's got a royal back. So they must be a color variation going on here. And basically what my uncle says, look, these guys were printing, and whatever was in their ink distributor's truck, that's what they were putting on press. So because you have to remember that in the design sense, in art sense, whatever you want to call it, standardized colors don't come around until 1952. So the CMYK that we know now that are standard colors doesn't exist. It's basically, oh, you need blue for your boxes? Okay, yeah, I got blue on the back of the truck. Now, again, that blue may be royal, that may be, somewhere in between, but that's the blue. And that's why you get that weird kind of almost like gamut of yellows on the jackies, that some are just like neon bright in your face, and some of them look like they're just fading back into the paper. So to take it one step further with the Joe DiMaggio that you were talking about, the other thing that they did, which they started on the Pirate set, and I'm not talking the Pittsburgh Pirate set, I'm talking the Swashbuckler Blackbeard set, is they started experimenting with halftones. And halftones is what you do when you set up your printing plates, that you make a smaller dot that when combined with another dot makes a different color. Joe DiMaggio's case, it was green. So if you have any kind of variance in the blues or the yellows, you're going to get a different color green. So you're going to get that kind of pea soup nasty green, or you're going to get that kind of minty green. And then there's the ones that are out there that are also blue. Totally. And what that tells you is that the yellow ink key, basically the inkwell, ran out. And again, if you have press operators that aren't paying attention to when inks are running out, then you're going to continue to run basically 4 at a time, that there's no yellow on any of the cards. So that's why when you go through, and whenever I get a question from people, I got one from Chantilly a couple of years back. Somebody had a Joe DiMaggio that had no black ink on it. It was just the silhouette of basically like the color blobs. And he said, is this one of one? And I said, no, it's one of 4. In theory, because how many made it through quality control? Yeah. So it's like, they were printed on one sheet. Now, if all 4 of them made it out, then you're one of 4. You're not going to go any higher than that, though. So there's a Gerald Pretty card that I found actually at Strongsville, I think about 3 years ago, in one of the value bins. And again, just being absolute obsessed with all the set, I knew that it was missing the blue ink because it didn't have the band of green in the back of it. And so, just being the capitalist that I am, I'm like, well, it'd be kind of fun to own all 4 from that sheet. Went on eBay, it turns out 2 sheets made it through because there was 6 of them on there. And so I'm like, all right, so there's no more than 8, but the rest of them are on there and they got a hefty price on them. So
that's really cool. Well, this has all been fascinating, but getting back to the short prints, because I wanted to make sure, I feel like that was really important. How do you feel like these short prints ended up specifically starting to be found in the Grand Lakes? I think you said Grand Lakes or Finger Lakes. I'm not sure.
Great Lakes. No, I grew up in the Finger Lakes. It was Great Lakes.
So, sorry about that. Yeah.
No. So again, we go further into the whole research thing. And again, it was one of those things that Ted Zanadakis on the Net 54 boards and stuff like that had preached about forever, as far as when the actual, cards hit and everything like that. And then there was this lawsuit that kind of sat out there. And, Dr. James Beckett had said, I never heard of a lawsuit or anything. And after digging in May of 49, it was the second lawsuit, basically an injunction that Bowman had put against Leaf, getting them to shut down their operations. And so this lawsuit became a pivotal moment in not just the cards that they would produce in 48 and 49, but also going forward. And it would also kind of set the table for the Topps Bowman fight, because the same tactics were used in both. Leaf just basically folded up shop and said, forget it. It's not worth it. We'll just keep on doing our own thing. So what happens is that through the research, I was able to find that everything left the facility in Chicago for Leaf in 49. March 14th, 49, first truck leaves for Boston carrying the Leaf cards in it. And that was the baseball cards. The football and the 1948 football, the boxing, and the Pirate cards had all come out in 48. So 49 hits. Everything goes out March 14th. On March 22nd, first lawsuit comes across from Bowman to Leaf, basically saying, knock it off. You're copying exactly what we're doing. The whole thing, or so it was able to find in the Cook County archives in Chicago, was able to find the court documents that basically had the entire thing, the lawsuit from Bowman, the answer from Leaf, which was hilarious to me because, again, looking back on it through now eyes, you're able to see, okay, well, they had an exhibit that they were showing, okay, yeah, you know what? We've been putting out cards for a while now. Here's the cards we've been putting out. And oh, by the way, you guys aren't the only ones putting out cards in 48. There was this other company called Topps that had these, magic cards and stuff like that. So, that all happens. And essentially what the long and short of it is in late 49, they basically shut it down, where they're just like, all right, they tried to get out of the lawsuit without having to pay, because what Bowman was saying is, hey, we've got agreements with players. You don't have those agreements. So you need to pay all the players, and you need to pay us for any damages of what your product has caused our product. And then you get into the whole name, image, likeness, and everything like that. That there's very contemporary things going on back then that have kind of a toehold in what's going on nowadays, especially in college sports. But the long and short of it is, when they got to the end where they were basically just, okay, we're done with, because the set itself was originally supposed to be like 300 cards. And I think when they got to the end of the lawsuit, they basically just said, all right, just push them out. The injunction that happened in May of 49 shut down the East Coast. It was based out of Pennsylvania and shut down all of their East Coast distribution. So that only left basically between the East Coast and Chicago. That left the Great Lakes. And so that's where the short prints went.
Interesting. So one of the things I'm having a hard time following, but I'm sure others would want to know as well, and you may not know, but if the cards are starting to be pushed out in March of 49, was it the whole set, or was it only some of the set, and that's why the short prints are tough to find? That's what I'm confused about.
Yeah, it was the first 49 cards. So again, going through what was found in the book is that those first 49 players, the ones that are easy to find, the non-short print side, those are the ones that hit the market and went. So those go out in
bulk, in mass scale, sure.
But then there's something that happens along the way, and I was able to find that there was a warehouse fire, but I can't tie that to the fact that the printing plates changed. And you referenced it when you were going through the stack of cards that you had, the changes on the Aberson and the Peterson. And so that whole stack of cards that you have, those are all early prints. Those aren't late prints, because late prints, something happens that they change the printing. Now, there is a degradation that happens in printing plates just intuitively. As you're running through cards, it happens. But they actually went through and changed the appearance of the players on the cards for the only reason that I can understand would be that they didn't think that the hats were bright enough, that they didn't think that the cards were dynamic enough, that they wanted to add more colors to it. So the Kent Peterson card that you had before, you had a black hat variation on that. The counter, the pair to that one, is a red hat variation. And what they essentially did was, in the printing process, they masked off where the black was going over top of the hat to let the red shine through, and now he's got a red cap. Now, if you look at that and you take that application, you put it against everything else. And again, this is not the color variations, because that's the roundabout that I had with PSA trying to get them to recognize this, is that you can go through, and I think it's something like 36 of the 49 players in that first offering have a variation card. It's not just Kent Peterson. Kent Peterson is basically it's 30% of the population is that red hat Kent Peterson. The other 70% is the main printing. Aberson actually happened earlier, because there's a time period that they changed the Aberson, and I don't know why, but that happened before this other switch happened. And then the other known variation that's out there is the Gene Hermansky, that basically the eye is gone.
That's a big one. Yeah.
And that one is, in my opinion, is a straight up printing error. It's basically over inking, because where the Hermansky set on the
where the eye gets
itself, it got filled in, because you can actually find cards that are out there that have the K is partially filled in, the I is filled in, so
I've seen that as well.
Yeah, so that one's not a true variation, but the hats are something that becomes very interesting, because not only did they subtract the black from the hats, they also added color bars. And so on cards like Jackie, on Phil Rizzuto, on Babe Ruth, you can actually find that they changed those cards not only by subtracting the black, but also by adding color bars to connect the background to the nameplate. So there is a 30% of the population is actually at a shorter printing than everything else in the main printing. And that's not even before you get to the short prints.
Yeah, no, this is all fascinating. I feel like I can keep you for hours. I will not do that, I promise. But getting back to center about the short prints, and now I kind of see it. So effectively, if I may, in my own words, so I can summarize for the audience so that we could all understand. So effectively, Leaf comes out with, if you will, their first group of cards from this massive set that they would like to produce. And effectively, even though, let's just say they had this lofty goal of 300, they had no reason to think that this first 49 or the second 49 were going to be the last 49 cards. They were going to keep going. But then the lawsuit comes, and not only does the lawsuit come, but effectively, as we're going to get to as we finish up and talk about the dating and the timing, what happens is, although the first 49, like we know, it's not hard to find a Jackie per se. It's not hard to find the Babe or the Ruth, or the Teddy, etc. Maybe in high grade it is, but the reason is because those go out in the mass, marketing and the mass release. And to be clear, just like Topps regularly comes out with Series 1, Series 2, and Update, if they were going to come out with Series 2, and in the middle of a Topps Series 2, there's a combination of a fire, a lawsuit or lawsuits, and other mitigating factors, they also might have faced a similar situation. Let's push out what we have. And the reason why I'm using today's Topps, because I want folks to understand. So let's rewind decades to Leaf. Ultimately, Leaf has this product, but they're really looking at the product as gum, not cards, right? And they're saying, hey, these cards are really worthless to us. Let's pump out the gum. And even though we can't really produce the cards anymore, we don't want the cards because that's not our business. And the only part that I don't quite get, but I think I understand, is not only were these second 49, i.e. the short prints, limited, but explain exactly how they ended up in Michigan. And I'm sure there's some reasonable explanation in terms of there wasn't nearly as much. And I guess maybe from the way you're describing it, because there wasn't as much, they couldn't have this full release. And I guess for whatever reason, Michigan just got their stash, and that's where a lot of the short prints were found.
Yeah, and I think
that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that what it is that you kind of look at it, and it's almost a proximity game. It's like, all right, well, if we can't distribute cards on the East Coast anymore, then let's just push it out to everything that borders, or is within 100 and some odd miles of the factory, and just call it.
I agree with you. That's why they weren't in Jersey, because Jersey's 9 hours and much further away, and dang it, because that's where my family grew up. But maybe that's why we didn't have any short prints in our collection.
Yeah, well, and I think
Well,
it's
this
interesting,
is
especially when you see like a lot of the East Coast collections that pop up when it's like there was one on Antique Roadshow a couple of years ago that was like, oh, this is
very
my
well known episode.
collection.
Sure.
They were all that first printing, and they were outside of Boston. So it's like, yeah, the main push made it all the way to the East Coast. The short prints with all the other variables that were going on were proximity. Just push it out to whoever we got. We're done with it. Because again, Leaf doesn't produce another baseball card until 1960. They don't produce it with gum. Through threat of tops, they put them out.
Oh,
with
it's marbles. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, quick pause. Shout out to my friend Simeon Littman from Antiques Roadshow. Not only a good friend of mine, but he's also a valued member of the Antiques Roadshow community. But before we run out of time, Bri, and this is, I'm sure to me, I love all the nooks and crannies because I'm a card nerd or enthusiast like you. But for those that maybe only came for the dating, and what I mean is the big news that has kind of shocked some vintage collectors is that it's really not 1948 Leaf baseball, even though they might have been well intended. There is definitive proof that the 1948 Leaf baseball cards, in fact, never left the factory for mass release until the spring of 1949. So one, bro, I ask you, how did you definitively find that out? And then two, which we'll come to in a minute, and I think is just as interesting, is what's the impact on the market, or is it too early to tell? I.e., does this make the 1949 Bowman Jackie more desirable? Does it make the 48 Leaf / 49 Leaf Jackie less desirable? Does it put them on equal footing? But I'll let you tackle both of those questions.
Yeah. So it's interesting because on the before getting into the Cook County Archives, it's a simple thing of what I love doing and what I love about cards is reading the backs. And you start looking at the facts that are on the backs of the cards, and you start seeing dates, and you put that against the fact that, again, this is a candy company, right? So it's like you start looking at when the MVP awards came out. Okay, well, that's in November. You start looking at some of the trades that are actually referenced on the back of the cards. Now you're into December. Now, again, as a candy company, are you going to be printing baseball cards when you're going into the Christmas season, when you're pumping out as much candy as you possibly can? No, you're going to shelf it until next year before the next thing. And it's interesting because in the main printing and in the short printing, they share the same, essentially the same number of copyrights that are 48 and 49. I think it's 3613. And so it's work was done in 48, undoubtedly. And I think that's why you get, there were cards that they were pushing out in 48. They weren't pushing out baseball cards in 48. And so, there are things that contribute to that. But the big kind of the smoking gun that I was actually waiting on pushing out the book for was I was just like, everything else is just going to be an opinion unless I can actually find something tangible that says it, in writing, good to go. And that came through the lawsuit, which was basically Marshall Leaf, who was the president of Leaf at that time, saying that the first truck that had baseball cards on it left Chicago March 14th, 1949.
Which is incredible. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands what Brian just said. You found a legal document from a court case that says that this iconic Leaf set from 48/49 was definitively not released in mass production to the American public until the spring of 49. So my question for you, Bri, and then of course anyone who's watching this, I want to get your opinion. Why are we not renaming the set the 1949 Leaf baseball set? And obviously I'm looking to Nat and his team at PSA, to be fair, SGC or others. I do have a 48 Leaf Jackie, but it's not, I just want to be transparent. I am finding it hard to refute that this set should not be renamed, especially with a legal document stating when the cards were definitively released. Why do you think we've not renamed the set yet, at least in our hobby, the 1949 Leaf baseball set?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with money, candidly. I mean, I think that's the seems to be the common thread through everything is that, and it's funny too, because whenever I get pushback, whenever someone, fires an email over to me and they're like, yeah, you don't have any proof, you just have opinions. I'm like, no, I've got proof. And I'm devaluing my Jackie Robinson as well. I'm not doing this to just, poke a hole.
Yeah, you're not doing
run
this
away.
because your book, I'm sure you're not going to be moving to an island because of your book, Bri.
Right. No, not yet. There's a lot. And actually,
I hope maybe,
Well, I mean, for other reasons, hopefully, but not for this. But no, I mean, I think
not
the
for this
community's
one, yeah.
been great about understanding it. But I think that there is, and it is a fascinating thing, because like when you look at how grading companies handle, especially the 1948 football set, that every little variance is captured in a grade. That when I reached out and tried to basically talk with PSA about it, that it was like cut and dry. No, we know about the color variations. And I'm like, no, there's print variations too. Because again, when you start talking about valuations of the cards, if within that you say, okay, now it's a 1949 Jackie, and it's a 1949 Bowman. Okay. Now you kind of get yourself into a situation of, Tony Gwynn, he's got 3 rookie cards in 83. Which is his definitive rookie card? Well, it's personal preference now, right? It's hey, I like the Topps card better than any of them, so that's the one I'm going to go for. Does that make the other ones not rookie cards? No, not at all. And again, you start getting into the true classification of rookie cards, and that becomes a sticking point as well, because then you have the bond bread. You've got Cuban issue cards for Stan Musial.
Well, I was going to believe me. I'll definitely keep you for hours if we get into that.
Yeah, so I mean,
but I think you're right. I think you nailed it.
Too.
I was going to say, for me, it doesn't matter, because you're right. I loved all those 3 Tony Gwynn rookies growing up, and I love the 1948/49 Leaf Jackie, and I also love the 1949 Bowman Jackie. And it doesn't make one more or less valuable to me. I enjoy them both. But it is really fun to debate. And before I let you go, I'm curious, because I have a really good friend who has been an avid collector of the 1948 Leaf football set for some time. And at least from one collector here, and maybe a couple of the guys in the office, we'd love to see you come out with another book about the 1948 Leaf football set. Or if that's too much, roll in maybe like not as much research, but talk about the football, right? The Pirates and some of the other things that Leaf were doing and how that led to 1960, because I'm here for the sequel, Bri, and I think many others are as well.
Relief 2 coming out soon, right?
What do you think? Have you considered it, or you're not sure?
You know what? I had such a blast doing it. I think that it's definitely in and again, being a collector in general, there's so many other things that I'm interested in that it's like the same. Well, why hasn't anybody figured that out? Why hasn't anybody acknowledged the fact that T201s come from 2 different factories? I mean, all the rabbit holes that exist in the hobby that make it so engaging for me. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole story to be told about the 1948 Leaf football set being the only true numbered set that they actually produced. I mean,
I'm excited to buy the book and help you promote it, Bri. That's for sure.
Okay, I'll send you a copy as soon as it's done.
Thank you. How does someone find you and order this book if they are interested?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, or you can go through reliefbook.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This was an absolute treasure of a conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing you at the National.
I'll be there. I promise. I'll swing by.
All right, gang. I hope you enjoyed that candid conversation that we just had with Brian, who is the author of the Relief book, all about the 1948/1949 Leaf baseball card set, the intricacies, the errors, the story behind when it came out, meaning was it 48 or 49, the short prints, and he really does a wonderful job of incorporating what was going on in our country, specifically the Chicago area where Leaf was at in the 1948 and 1949 time period. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next week. Take care.